Hi, my name is Carrie Vaughn, and I'm here with James S.A. Corey, author of the new book Leviathan Wakes. Now, James S.A. Corey, as you can see, is actually two people. We have Daniel Abraham and Ty Frank, and this is awesome. Thank you guys for doing this.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I know the first thing people are going to ask when they find out that James Corey is actually two people is what is your process? How did you guys get started on collaboration? How did that work? How did you write a book together?
Well, the process itself was actually pretty straightforward. I go over to Ty's house on Wednesday morning. I bring the breakfast burritos and the coffee. And actually, he makes the coffee too. There's a lot of coffee involved. And we talk about what we need to do in the next couple of chapters. And I write one, he writes the other. We swap them. We edit each other's chapters and stick them on the back of the master manuscript and keep doing that until it's done.
Because my wife and I were hanging out at Daniel's house with his wife, and we were talking about a game that I had run for a number of years, and he saw the background materials I had accumulated for that game, and after looking through those materials said, we need to write a book because people who write books don't do this much research. So yeah, that's how I got started.
Well, listen, anytime I'd ask him, so what do the corridors on Arrow Station look like? He just knew. It's right there, and it was such a beautifully, fully realized world just to start with.
So it's like the heavy lifting was already done.
I thought so. I thought, I know what you could do with that. And that's kind of how it started.
There's two main characters, Holden and Miller, and each of you was in charge of one of those characters. Is that how it worked?
I wrote the initial pass on all of the Holden chapters was me, and the initial version of all the Miller chapters was Daniel, but we've edited and rewritten chunks of each other's stuff enough.
The kind of literary project that Ty and I are both interested in is close enough that we weren't that far to begin with. And then, I did the first pass on all the Miller chapters, but Ty did all the editing. Yeah, he did all the first pass on the Holden chapters, but I'm the guy who went through and said, we had not that adjective, no. And so I think that the voice of the story is pretty seamless.
Yeah, I have read the book and I thought it was awesome. I can't wait for the next one. We were just talking, when do I get to read the next one? And I have to wait a very long time. I know how my fans feel now.
Very long time, a few months.
A few months, okay. One thing I wanted to talk about in terms of space opera is a genre. And Leviathan Wakes is kind of this interesting mix of the old classic golden age, near future, working in space kind of story, the old Heinlein and Frederick Pohl and that kind of really realistic, you imagine that this sort of thing actually could happen in a few decades, but also the very epic, world-spanning military science fiction that I think, now currently over the last few years we've really come to associate the kind of epic space opera with military science fiction, and Leviathan Wakes does have this military background, but your main characters are not in the military, and when I thought about that, it seemed pretty unique to me that most of the military science fiction we get now, or most of the space opera, has military main characters. So I wanted to ask you about your thoughts about the intersection of military science fiction and space opera, and if you made a conscious decision to not foreground the military in such a way by having your characters be a part of it.
Well, I can definitely answer from Holden's perspective. Holden, the thing that makes Holden an interesting character to me, or at least an interesting character to write, is that he is a character who's caught up in events much larger than he is, who, as the story progresses, only starts to become aware of what he's involved in. And he then, because he's my protagonist, he then gets to decide how to act. The trick with military sci-fi, and again, this is all happening against a military background because there are wars happening in the background around him. Yeah, but he gets to decide how he's going to act. There's no chain of command for him. the trick with military sci-fi is if you make it about the generals, they never actually do anything. They make the decisions, but they don't do anything. If you make it about the frontline people, they get to do all the exciting stuff, but somebody's bossing them around. Somebody's telling them what to do. And I wanted somebody who got to decide how to act and then take those actions on his own. And I really couldn't do that if he was part of a military hierarchy. And I'll let Daniel talk about why he wanted to do Miller.
No, Miller. Part of what our mandate was, I thought, when we started doing this, was to show as much of the world as we could. And we talked about this being kind of a kitchen sink book. It is space opera, and there's some military science fiction, and there's some horror, and there's some noir mystery.
And there's a noir detective story in the middle of it.
And the noir detective story in the middle of it is Miller. And he's the kind of representative of that genre in this book. And yeah, it never occurred to me to make him, military police or anything. He's the broken down cop in the pork pie hat who's seen one too many horrible crimes, only he lives on an asteroid. Also, I've never been in the military. Ty's never been in the military. Yeah. There are people who are doing that, who can do it with an authenticity that I can't match. Not that I've been a police officer or a detective either, but I think that's in some ways a more familiar genre, and it's harder to screw up. I mean, it's if you blow the details on what it's like to live in the military, a lot of people know that.
Yeah, and to add to, Daniel just made me think of something. Part of the other thing that I wanted to do, at least with Holden's story, is Holden spends the first half of the book on the run, and a military character, a person who is a part of the military and part of the hierarchy, has enormous resources they can call on. If their ship is shot down or if they're in trouble, they can call the command, and enormous resources are put at their disposal to rescue them or save them. And I needed Holden to be someone who's utterly cut off from help, so that it is believable that he spends the first half of the book running, and then makes it more emotionally satisfying when later he stops running and starts taking control. And I don't know how I would do that with a character who has access to the resources a military person would have.
It does seem like that I get this window, through those two characters, I get a window into, it's a world that on the surface is very familiar because I read, a lot of these living and working in space, Belter, merchant ships, kind of stories, and I've always loved them. But getting to see more of it than just the kind of standard characters that I'm used to, because we do get to see what the gritty side of the station looks like. We do get to see what a merchant who doesn't have all of these resources. So I was very aware of kind of the vastness of the world in the backdrop, but through the lenses of these very kind of comfortable, familiar, likable. The characters themselves are not epic, even though they're moving in this epic world, and I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think we managed to make both of these guys not exactly larger than life, even though they're moving in a really large setting and with a very large, kind of a big plot. Part of what we were trying to do with this was make it very. When you say space opera, we spend a lot of time talking about space a lot of time, and not a lot of time talking about opera. And the thing about opera is it's really sentimental. And we wanted to spend a lot of time on the emotional lives of these people as we have the space battles, and it's important that the kind of the heart of the story not get lost. That Miller's quest for redemption is taken seriously. That Holden's kind of journey as a holy fool from being the XO to being the captain to being the real mover and shaker, all is taken seriously, is engaging and important.
And part of the other thing we got out of the dual viewpoint thing is we got to have a character who's an insider and a character who's an outsider.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is very much a story about cultural clashes and people who outside of the culture don't understand what it's like inside the culture. And Miller got to be our insider character. He understands the culture in which these events are taking place. And Holden is from Earth, and he thinks like an Earthman, and he wants to help the people in the story, but he doesn't really understand. And so by showing an inside and outside perspective, we could, I think, more fully show the difference in the cultures that are involved in the conflict.